Hello, BSC6003 students. Dr. Conway here for Lesson 5 on the logic and concepts of cost-benefit analysis. For those who finished your Part 1 in good shape and you feel good about it, congratulations. For those who got into Part 1 and never realized the effort commitment that was necessary and would like to have done better, just keep going, okay? Try to get ready to do better on Part 2 and pull it all together in your final product. And there's still time to recover and do well going forward, all right? So let's deal with the logic and concepts of cost-benefit analysis. It's important for me to give you now, let's benchmark what we've done so far and how it's going to fit into our cost-benefit analysis framework, all right? So let me just start off by giving you some of the basic concepts. We all know by now, or we should, that we do cost-benefit analysis primarily driven by two considerations, scarcity and opportunity costs. All resources are scarce, so we use various tools to determine whether we're using them in the best ways possible. And cost-benefit analysis is one tool for doing that, for determining whether we're using our scarce resources in the best way possible, all right? And that we're not creating unnecessary opportunity costs because we could have used that money more appropriately or more effectively and efficiently in any other area, all right? And that's why energy managers are always competing for scarce resources, and that's why energy managers need to have better skills at completing things like cost-benefit analysis to show decision makers, financial decision makers, that proposals for enhancing energy efficiency, moving to renewables and so on, are competitive with other possible investments in terms of scarcity and opportunity cost. Okay, so cost-benefit analysis is a generally accepted set of methodological rules about how to identify, analyze, and present economic information to decision makers as one basis to make choices between options to address a problem or an opportunity. A problem or an opportunity. All right, so energy management can be either of those things, right? We're really not competitive on energy, we have to do something. Or if we did this, we would be that much more competitive on energy relative to measures that are coming for greenhouse gas control or vis-a-vis our competitors or whatever. So it's always a problem or an opportunity. In some cases, it can be both, obviously. And cost-benefit analysis is a way of answering the two key questions. Is this worth doing, i.e. relative to other options? How will we know whether it was worth it when we're done? In other words, cost-benefit analysis has to have a clear way of not only justifying an investment for the future, but also monitoring whether that investment is successful. And this is obviously a key consideration for energy managers because all of the industry studies illustrate that one of the major failures of a lot of cost-benefit analysis business cases is the lack of clear verification. And nobody wants to put money into something where they're not going to be able to verify, in fact, whether they got what they paid for. All right? Now, another key consideration in cost-benefit analysis is what we call the hierarchy of information. Cost-benefit analysis, being an economic analysis approach, adopts this hierarchy of information. Monetization is always best, okay? Is monetization always best because we're money-grubbing economists and we don't really care about values and ethics and all that kind of stuff? That's complete nonsense, okay? We use monetization for a couple of reasons. One, we use monetizations because monetary values are one of the few units of measurement that we have that can compare completely dissimilar objects across space and time. I can compare an investment today in Canada to an investment made 30 years in India by using monetization. Why? Because I know the exchange rate and I know the appreciation rate of the currency, the inflation rate, and so on, and I can bring all those adjustments back to one currency at this point in time. And I can compare. It's the only unit of measurement we have that can actually do that because it's the only unit of measurement we have that goes back 100 years or more in terms of allowing us to make these calculations, okay? Quantification is second best. When you cannot monetize all of these things, quantification can be also a powerful thing. For example, if you bring better lighting into a mall, are people staying longer or not? we don't have to monetize that. They didn't buy more shoes or more shirts or more whatever, but they stayed longer. So our probability of attracting them to buy something is higher. Okay, so quantification can still be a very valuable consideration. All right. And then qualification is third best, because with qualification we can't seek the precision we can with numerical values, particularly monetization. But we always need qualification, obviously, to be able to explain our monetized and quantified results. All right. So typically most cost-benefit analysis ends up becoming what we call mixed method. Okay. It applies as much monetization as we can. Where we can't do that, we apply quantification. And where we have monetization and quantification, we need to qualify it with information, written information that contextualizes or conceptualizes why we're doing things the way we are. That's why when we did part one of your term project, I wanted you to qualify what type of building, because only with that qualification can you determine whether you made the right choices in terms of technology with respect to that technology's monetary and quantified features. I mean, how much power does it use? And then how much does that power cost? All right? So you get the point there. All right? The second big consideration in any sort of cost-benefit analysis is scope. You cannot determine the costs and benefits of a cost-benefit analysis without determining the scope first. All right? Who's going to be impacted? What's going to be impacted? Where is it going to be impacted? And when could it be impacted? Are all very, very critical features of a cost-benefit analysis, because that understanding of scope says, okay, there's a benefit here, there's a cost there, there's a cost-benefit there, and allows you to say, oh, these people would be impacted. Oh, the operations guys would be impacted in this way for this length of time, and this will be serious for if we did it at this time as opposed to another time, i.e. the when. All right? So this project scope and its planning features need to be clearly understood, because only through that can you begin to itemize costs and benefits. How do you know all the costs and benefits if you don't know who's going to be impacted, where, when, how, and so on? All right? So that is really critically important to understanding, to doing a costs and benefits, because without clarity on scope, the analyst cannot fully anticipate all the direct and indirect costs and benefits, intended and unintended, of a project. The analyst also cannot determine whether the project is feasible in its entirety or does it need to be phased. For example, it might need to be able to go ahead for all other parts of the business except operations, because the operations is meeting a huge order in 2021. Okay, or something like that. And so you need to be able to understand the scope implications of your project. All right, and it can also, the scope is necessary for determining project risks and risk mitigation strategies. If you don't know who's going to be impacted, how, where, and when, you can't very well devise risk mitigation strategies for your business case. So scope has to be very, very clearly established. All right. Now, then until you get get that scope question resolved, you can't then establish your baseline, because all a baseline is the situation within the project scope before an investment is made, and then you're going to be comparing that baseline with the impacts of your investment going forward into the future. That's the only way we can do an economic analysis. We're comparing what are positive impacts, hopefully, that we have on our situation, on our project scope, after we make the investment. And we can only determine that is if we compare it to the situation before the investment was made. And that all economic analysis need to compare change with a baseline. So the baseline has to be clearly established with the exact same variables you're going to monitor with respect to the impacts of the investment out into the future. All right. So if you're measuring hair color in the baseline, you have to have that variable is also part of your measurement of project success of hair color into the future. Okay. Silly example, but you get my point. All right. So the baseline is comprised of all the factors that you're going to measure. In the baseline will be measurements of all the factors within the project scope that you think your investment is going to impact. Okay? So all the factors must be measured in the baseline, those factors that you think will be impacted by your investment. Okay? So if you think your investment is going to bring down energy costs Hopefully it does, obviously in our case. That has to be measured for the baseline and then measured off into the future. If you think it's going to improve worker productivity by improving lighting in a building, you have to have a productivity measure in the baseline. And then that productivity measure will be monitored after the investment into the future. Okay, so all the factors that are important that you think you will influence through your investment in the scope of the project become things that have to be measured in the baseline and then compared once the investment is made into the future. Okay, and that's why we did that in term project 1, right? We developed a conceptual baseline, a standard off-the-shelf build. All of those factors that go into a standard off-the-shelf build that we might change to become a green build later on need to be monitored in terms of their cost at the baseline, how the project investment will change those decisions, and what benefits get accrued because of that greener build off into the future. In other words, power bills in the baseline are X, right? When we make an intervention or an investment in this to make it a more efficient lighting system, then what are the benefits off into the future? So we're measuring the same thing, power bills, but we might also be measuring worker satisfaction, worker productivity, any number of other factors. And if we measure them in the baseline because we think they're in the scope of our project, in terms of its cost and benefit profile, we need to measure those off into the future. Okay, so we have set ourselves up now to compare a green build with that baseline that you've established in part 1 of your term project. All right. Now it's important to realize we cannot do any of this, a baseline establishing without a clear scope, right? And then once we establish the clear scope, when we establish the baseline, we have to think. We have to anticipate, well, all those factors that we expect to influence positively through our investment have to be measured at the baseline and then measured off into the future. And that can be quite simple when it comes to costs of a project because most project costs already have a market price, right? Most of them do. You know what a light bulb costs. You know what a generator costs. You know what a boiler costs. You know what a rooftop air conditioning units cost. You know what electrical machinery and elevators cost, and so on. Okay, those costs are relatively easy to determine, and so the cost side of a ledger, always the monetization of that hierarchy of information is always simpler. The benefit side can have some simple things to measure that are monetized. Cost savings on your power bill, all right? Reliability, whatever the case may be, might be able to be measured fairly effectively. But there's going to be a lot of benefits on projects that sometimes are not monetized. Let's say your company is truly a green company and they're trying to lessen the impact on, let's say, birds or whatever the case may be. Birds don't fly around with price tags on them, right? Or if they're trying to influence their brand to become more of a green company. How do we measure that? It doesn't have an automatic price, okay? So sometimes we have to innovate as to how to provide value, or we have to use quantitative techniques instead of monetized techniques, okay, to press forward on that, all right? So it's important for you to start to think now about what it is you're going to do in terms of your green build, even though that's part of what you did in part 1. Keep thinking about that and thinking about how you're going to, what's the best way to design a project for your green build that returns the highest benefits relative to costs. All right? So that's what you're going to be thinking about next. I just provided some very simple spreadsheets here, or lists really. But we'll be getting into that in much greater detail as we go through, all right? As we go through the project. So I want you to start to think now a little bit more about your green build, how you're going to establish the measures for that. And then once we do that, we're going to be setting up a cost-benefit framework. We're going to be talking about net present value, IRR, and so on. One of the things that I need to tell you at the outset, though, I know that a lot of you learn about simple payback period. To me, simple payback period is a terrible statistic for any economic analyst, okay? And the reason for that is that it's like buying a car, all right? When you buy a car, the cost-benefit of ratio before it's paid and after it's paid becomes quite a different thing. Do you stop counting the value of your car as soon as you pay the bank off? No, because most of the benefits that car is now accruing to you are being accrued after the car is already paid for, because now you're driving it for free. It's returning all of the same benefits that you had before, but now you're not paying $600, $700, $800 a month to pay it off. So if I stopped that simple payback period, it would make no sense for me to buy a car. It would make no sense, because at the end of the day, costs at the first few years of your project are exceeding benefits for most people. Unless you're a traveling salesman or something, your benefits are not being adequately accrued until your car is completely paid off. And the same thing goes with electrical equipment investments, okay? So when you do a cost-benefit analysis, the scope of your cost-benefit analysis in terms of time, how long the cost-benefit analysis is going to apply to, say out 15, 20 years, in terms of payback from these investments you're making in 2021, let's say, you would determine that at least over a 10-year period, and typically longer if it's a technological piece of technological equipment, like a boiler system that can last 20 or 30 years, all right? But we'll get into that in greater detail as we go on, all right? So start thinking about that, making sure you're reading the stuff on cost-benefit analysis. Do look at that entire series on the Conservation Society on cost-benefit analysis. View it all. You'll learn a ton from that, okay? It's worthwhile, all right? And no Zoom call this week, but there is a quiz. Don't forget your quiz for this week, all right? And we'll be talking to you in the next week on the next Zoom call that we have scheduled. Have a good week, gang.